People say the most dangerous thing in a home isn't the knives in the kitchen drawer or the pills in the medicine cabinet. It's the person who knows exactly where both are kept and loves you enough that you'd never think to check. I know that now, but last February, standing in the snow-dusted driveway of our house in Barhaven, watching my husband's car pull out for his Wednesday evening hockey practice, I still thought the problem was my anxiety. My therapist had a name for it. My husband had a gentler one. I worried too much. It had been going on since October. Every Thursday morning I woke up foggy, slow, like I'd been dragged through something heavy in the night. Not hungover. I barely drank. Not sick. Just off. The kind of off that makes you wonder if 32 is when your body starts making decisions without you. You've been exhausted since you started that new position, my husband said over coffee one morning, not looking up from his phone. Anyone would be wiped out working those hours. He wasn't wrong that the hours were brutal. I was a project coordinator for a federal contractor, and the fall had swallowed me whole. But the fog wasn't tiredness. Tiredness, I knew. This was something else. Something that settled over my brain like a second skin every Thursday and lifted by Saturday afternoon, as if it had never been there at all. Every Wednesday night, the same thing. I'd eat dinner, feel fine, watch something with my husband, and then wake up Thursday feeling hollowed out. By October, I'd started keeping a note in my phone. Just dates and how I felt. Mild habit, I thought. The kind of thing anxious people do. By January, I had 14 entries. They were identical. I didn't show my husband. I didn't know why. Some instinct I didn't have language for yet. Instead, I made an appointment with our family doctor, which meant a 3-week wait, which meant February, which meant the Wednesday that changed everything. It was a work-from-home day. My husband had left early for a site meeting in Canada. I was on a call with our project team when I heard the key in the door. He'd come back to grab a forgotten tablet. He didn't know I was home. I could hear him in the kitchen, the familiar sounds, cupboard, fridge, the quiet scrape of something on the counter, then the front door again, and he was gone. I didn't think much of it. Finished the call, went to make tea. The tin of chamomile was on the wrong shelf. We kept it on the left side of the spice cupboard. It was on the right. I'm particular about the spice cupboard. My husband jokes about it. But the tin was on the right, and the lid wasn't seated quite flush, the way it is when someone's been in a hurry to close it. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, holding the tin. I made myself a coffee instead, from the machine, using a pod from a sealed box I'd bought myself that morning. I drank it at the counter and stared at the chamomile tin like it owed me an explanation. Thursday morning I woke up clear, sharp, no fog. I hadn't made the tea. The realization didn't announce itself. It crept up the back of my neck while I was brushing my teeth, and by the time I drove to work I had to pull over in a no-frills parking lot and sit with my hands on the wheel for 5 minutes just to breathe through it. I wasn't sick. I wasn't anxious. Something was in the tea. The first thing I did was call my brother. He's older than me, a decade of law enforcement in Ottawa before he moved to private investigations, and he's the kind of man who doesn't ask unnecessary questions when you say, "I need you to do something for me," quietly. I told him everything. The Thursdays, the tea, the tin. He said he'd be at my house in an hour. He took the tin. He took a sample from the inside of the lid. He said he'd call me. He called me the next morning at 7:30. "You need to sit down," he said. The compound was something called clonazepam, ground fine, mixed in with the loose chamomile. Not a lethal dose. Sedating. Repeated exposure over months would look, to anyone who didn't look closely, like progressive exhaustion, disrupted sleep, or early onset anxiety disorder. The kind of thing that builds a paper trail. The kind of thing that makes people say, "She was struggling for a long time." "Who has access to that cupboard?" my brother said. It wasn't a question. My husband's name sat between us on the phone like a stone. I told my brother I needed 24 hours. He didn't like it, but he gave it to me. That night I did something I'd never done in 4 years of marriage. I went through my husband's things. Not the obvious places, his sock drawer, his email, the kind of places people check in movies. I went through the filing cabinet in our shared home office, the one where we kept the mortgage documents and the RRSP statements, and the folder I hadn't touched since we'd signed it at the TD branch on Bank Street. Our life insurance policies. Mine was there. $250,000. Standard term policy, 10 years, beneficiary listed as my husband. His was there too. Same amount, same term, my name as beneficiary. But there was a third document, tucked behind his. A printed copy of a change of beneficiary form, the kind you submit to the insurance company and keep a copy of for your records. It was dated November 7th, 6 weeks after my Thursday fog had started. The beneficiary on my policy had been changed. His name had been replaced by the name of a woman I had only met 4 times. She was his colleague, a project manager at the same engineering firm. She was listed as domestic partner and designated next of kin. I sat on the floor of our home office for a long time. Then I took a photo of every page in that filing cabinet. My brother had a contact at a private lab in Gloucester who could run an expedited toxicology panel. We arranged for me to go on Thursday morning before work, first thing. I brought the chamomile tin in a sealed plastic bag I'd labeled myself with the date. I also brought a hair sample I'd collected over several weeks. There are things you Google at 2 in the morning when your marriage starts to feel like a door you're afraid to open. The next 2 weeks were a performance I am not proud of and will never forget. I cooked dinner and watched television and went to sleep next to my husband and smiled at the right moments and pretended the filing cabinet had never given anything up. He was attentive. He was kind. He brought me home a coffee from Bridgehead on Tuesday mornings because he knew it was the one thing that reliably improved my mood. I drank it. I obsessively noted every ingredient I put in my body. I stopped touching the chamomile. My brother was building a file. My husband had taken out the new beneficiary form without my knowledge or signature, which in Ontario, and federally, depending on the policy type, requires the policyholder's involvement. He had forged my signature on the secondary consent form. That alone was fraud. But the forged signature was also dated the same week as my annual review at the insurance company, which I had attended by video call while he sat in the next room, supposedly on a work call of his own. He had timed the paperwork to coincide with an event where I was visibly present elsewhere. He'd thought of that. That was the thing that made my stomach drop the hardest. Not the pills, not the other woman, the thought he'd put into this, the patience. My brother made contact with an investigator at the insurance company through a professional channel he had from his old job. He gave them enough to open an internal inquiry without triggering any alerts that would reach my husband. They were quiet about it. Insurance fraud investigators tend to be. The lab results came back on a Friday. My hair samples showed metabolite traces consistent with benzodiazepine exposure over a period of 10 to 12 weeks. It was in writing, on a letterhead with a case number. My brother scanned it and sent me an encrypted copy and kept the original in a fireproof box in his car. I finally had my doctor's appointment the following Monday. I went alone. I told her everything. She added her own documentation, my reported symptoms over the last several months, the timeline, the negative results from every standard test she'd run. She agreed to write a supplemental clinical note. She was a woman who had been practicing family medicine in this city for 22 years, and when she looked at me across her desk, she said, "You are not imagining this." Those 5 words did something to me that I didn't expect. They didn't make me cry. They made me steady. I needed one more thing. I needed to hear him say it. This is the part my brother argued with me about the hardest. He said I had enough. He said the documentation was solid. The insurance investigator was already pulling threads. The lab result was court-worthy. He said I didn't need to put myself in the room with him, but I needed to know if he'd done it alone. The colleague. The woman on the beneficiary form. I didn't know what she knew. I didn't know if she was a victim of his narrative the same way I'd been, told some careful story about a wife who was unwell, who was difficult, who needed managing, or whether she was sitting in her apartment in Centertown right now, knowing exactly what the chamomile tin was for. I needed to find out. My brother called in a favor from a former colleague who did electronic surveillance legally and discreetly. A small voice-activated device was placed in the kitchen of our house on a Thursday afternoon while my husband was at work, and I had told him I was at a meeting in Gatineau. It looked like the corner of a surge protector. Our kitchen had 3 surge protectors already. He would not notice a 4th. Thursday became Friday. Friday became the weekend. Sunday evening, my husband took a call in the kitchen while I was upstairs, and I heard 2 words carry up through the ceiling, the way sound does in a house with old ductwork. Her name. The colleague's name. Said quietly, intimately, the way you say a name when the person attached to it has weight. Monday morning before he left for work, I told him I thought we needed a weekend away. Just us. I said I was feeling better and I wanted to reconnect, that the winter had made me feel distant and I missed him. I held his hand when I said it. He smiled. He said he knew just the place. A friend's cottage near Calabogie. Very private, he said, off-season, no neighbors. Beautiful out there when the lake is frozen. He had the details ready so fast. The address, the dates, which weekend was best, as though he'd been holding the suggestion in his back pocket, waiting. I smiled back and said that sounded perfect. What happened next I planned down to the gram. I contacted my brother that night. I told him the cottage, the dates. He knew Calabogie, had fished that lake, pulled the property records and found the friend's name and had him backgrounded within 24 hours. Clean, no connection to anything, probably genuinely lending the cottage. My husband had probably chosen it precisely because it was borrowed and normal and wouldn't raise questions. I packed my own bag. Inside the toiletry pouch, in a small sealed plastic case I'd bought at a running store, I had two things. The vitamin supplement I'd switched into his pill organizer at home 2 weeks ago, replacing what I'd found there. A bottle with a pharmacy label I didn't recognize, a name that wasn't mine or his, a doctor's name I looked up and found had retired 4 years ago, and my brother's secondary burner phone with one pre-programmed contact and a satellite text function. I also told my friend. She's been my closest friend since university, a Crown prosecutor in downtown Ottawa, and the only person in my life whose discretion I'd trust with this. I sat in her car in the parking lot of the Rideau Center on a Tuesday afternoon, and I told her everything. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You have a plan." It wasn't a question either. She agreed to be the person who would call the police if I sent her a specific text and didn't follow up within 20 minutes. The drive to Calabogie was 2 hours. My husband drove. He was in a good mood, telling a story about a project that had gone sideways at work, laughing at the parts that were objectively not funny. The lake was gray-white and flat under a February sky that couldn't decide between snow and just threatening it. The cottage was small and cedar-sided, and genuinely pretty in the way that things are pretty when you're not looking at them. He insisted on making dinner, something he didn't usually do. He'd brought groceries from the car in 2 careful trips and arranged them on the counter with a specificity I recognized now as performance. I offered to make tea after dinner. He said he'd make it. I said I wanted to. I'd been drinking too much coffee lately, I said, and I'd picked up a new herbal blend at the market near our house. I held up the small bag, loose leaf, the kind that comes in a craft paper pouch, and I want to try it. Something moved behind his eyes, very fast. Gone before I could name it. He said, "Sure." He sat at the small kitchen table with a glass of water while I put the kettle on. The tea I made was from the pouch I'd brought. For him I made chamomile, from the tin in the cottage's own cupboard, a generic brand with a B on the label. While I had my back to him at the counter, and I had made sure to choose the corner with the small mirror-fronted cabinet above it, the kind that reflects the room, I watched him reach into his jacket pocket and take something out. A small folded paper. He held it in his fist. He was waiting. When I turned around and set his mug in front of him, he smiled. He said thank you. He wrapped both hands around the mug, and when he lifted it to his lips, I said, casually, reaching back to the counter, "Oh, I forgot the honey. Here, let me take that a second." I lifted the mug from his hands. I swapped it with my own. I set his in front of me and said, "I put the honey in already, this one's yours," and smiled, and he looked at me for 1 second too long before he smiled back. He drank his tea. I nursed mine in small sips, and after about 40 minutes I let my eyes go soft. I let my sentences get a little slow. I yawned and said I was wiped, that the drive must have gotten to me, and he said, "Yes, go lie down, he'd clean up." His voice was very careful and very warm. I lay on the bed in the cottage's single bedroom and watched the ceiling and counted. I had taken nothing. I was clear-headed as a winter morning. After 20 minutes I heard the chair scrape back in the kitchen, then nothing. Then, very slowly, the sound of something, his glass, tipping and rolling on the table. I gave it another 10 minutes. He was slumped forward on the kitchen table with his cheek against his forearm, his breathing deep and even, and completely unconscious. I took his phone from his jacket. His passcode was our first apartment's postal code, something I'd seen him type 100 times without registering that I knew it. I opened his messages. The thread with her was near the top. I read backwards, 3 weeks ago. "The policy paperwork is clean. The doc's name won't trace. Stop worrying. 2 weeks ago, her. I don't like this timeline. She seems more alert. Him, she's fine. It's cumulative. Trust the process. 1 week ago, her. After this we're done with Canada. I mean it. I want the life we talked about. Him, Portugal. I know. A few more weeks." I took screenshots. I forwarded them to my brother's burner with shaking hands. Then I opened his banking app, same passcode, and found what I was looking for, a transfer, $40,000 sent 3 months ago to an account in her name at a different institution. The memo line said, investment, $40,000 from our joint home equity line of credit, the one we'd taken out for renovations last spring. I took screenshots of all of it. I sent them to my brother. Then I sent the prearranged text to my friend. 4 specific words we'd agreed on in the Rideau Center parking lot. I had 17 minutes. I packed my bag. I took the documents from his jacket pocket. The folded paper turned out to be a small pharmacy envelope, the kind that holds blister-packed pills already opened. I photographed both sides and put them in a Ziploc inside my toiletry case. I put on my coat and boots. I left his phone on the table beside him. I stepped outside into the Calabogie dark, and it was so cold the air felt like a clean thing, like a hand against my face. My brother was parked at the end of the access road. He'd driven up that afternoon and waited. He's the kind of man who waits. The drive back to Ottawa was quiet except for the highway and my own voice telling him what I'd found, and his voice asking the questions he needed to ask, and eventually a silence that was not empty but full of the particular weight of a plan that has worked. 4 days later, I sat at the kitchen table of my friend's apartment in the Glebe, while she outlined what the next steps looked like from a legal standpoint, speaking to me both as my friend and as someone who knew how the Crown Office would look at this case. Insurance fraud. Administering a noxious substance. That's the criminal code language, the section that covers what he'd done to my tea. Conspiracy. The conversation I needed to have with the insurance investigator, who had by then confirmed the forged signature independently. The colleague, it turned out, knew. She hadn't bought his story about an unwell wife. She'd been part of the planning. Her messages made that clear. My friend used the word co-conspirator the same way she'd use weather, matter-of-factly, because it was simply the correct term. He had been back from Calabogie by Sunday evening, claiming I'd left in the night, seeming confused. He filed a wellness check request with the Ottawa police on Monday morning. A very convincing worried husband. The officer who responded told me later that he'd seemed genuinely distressed. I was in my brother's guest room in Stittsville, distress-free, eating cereal and waiting. My friend worked fast. By the time the arrest happened, a Thursday morning, as it turned out, which felt like a kind of symmetry, the file included the lab toxicology results, the insurance fraud documentation with the forged signature confirmed by a certified forensic document examiner, the pharmacy envelope with fingerprints, the bank transfer records, and the text messages, which were obtained with proper process through an emergency application my friend helped me understand. She was arrested separately the same morning at her apartment building on Elgin Street. She didn't say anything. My husband, according to the officer who told my brother later, said a great deal, none of it useful to him. I was not there for any of it. I didn't want to be. What I wanted was to sit in my brother's kitchen with a cup of coffee I'd made myself and hear the phone ring and hear my friend's voice say, "It's done." Which is exactly what happened. The court process took 8 months. I won't render every detail. That's not the story. The story is the days inside those 8 months that I spent building something new from the parts I'd salvaged. I rented an apartment in Westboro. Small, 2 windows, a radiator that clanked. It was the first space that had ever been completely mine, and I loved it in a way I hadn't loved a place since I was 23 and broke and free. I found a therapist who specialized in coercive control. That's what the pattern had been, she told me. Not just the drugging, but the years before it, the quiet management of my perception, the word worry, weaponized until I doubted my own nervous system. Naming it helped, not immediately, but steadily. The sentencing happened in October in a courtroom on Elgin Street on a gray fall morning. I sat in the gallery. My friend sat beside me. My brother sat on my other side. He received 9 years on the criminal fraud charge, the administering charge, and the conspiracy count, with the possibility of parole after serving a third. His lawyer argued for less. The judge said, among other things, that the deliberateness of the plan, the forged document, the months of accumulated drugging, the coordination with another party, demonstrated a premeditation that the court could not treat lightly. He also noted the specific cruelty of targeting someone's trust in their own body. She received 7 years. She had provided limited cooperation with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge, which is how the Crown confirmed the final details of the Portugal plan. They had been looking at listings in the Algarve. They had been very specific about the life they wanted. I learned that in the courtroom. It's a strange thing, hearing the shape of the future someone built for themselves on the fact of your death. Outside the courthouse afterward, my brother put his arm around my shoulders, and we stood on the sidewalk in the October cold and didn't say anything for a while. The city moved around us the way cities do, indifferent and continuous, and it felt like exactly the right backdrop for the end of something. The insurance company voided the fraudulent beneficiary change and, after their own process, confirmed the original policy terms. The home equity funds were the subject of a separate civil proceeding that I let my lawyer handle because I didn't have the energy to care about the money the way I'd cared about everything else. I do care now, a little. The settlement helped with the deposit on a condo I bought in Hindenburg last spring. I have a balcony that faces west. On clear evenings, the sky goes pink and orange over the rooftops, and I stand out there with coffee and watch it happen. And I don't have to explain it to anyone or share it with anyone. And that is a gift I don't think I'll take for granted for a very long time. My friend came for dinner last month. She brought wine and I made pasta, and we sat at my table until almost midnight, talking about everything and nothing, and at one point she said, "You seem different." I asked her how. She thought about it for a moment. "Like you trust yourself," she said. I didn't have anything to add to that. It was just true. I still keep a note in my phone, not medical symptoms anymore. Just things I notice. The lake at Calabogie, frozen and gray, that I'll never go back to. The weight of a chamomile tin in both hands. The sound of my brother's voice saying sit down in a way that meant the world had already changed and was waiting for me to catch it up. The exact quality of the air outside that cottage at midnight. Cold and clean and completely mine. I kept the note because I learned something that February that I want to remember in my body, not just my head. When something feels wrong, it is worth the cost of finding out why, every time. No exceptions. Your nervous system is not your enemy. It is the first and most loyal thing you own. Trust it like your life depends on it, because mine did.